Joining me right now, Republican Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska. He sits on the House Armed Services Committee. He's a former Air Force Brigadier General who flew combat missions over Iraq. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here. Let me ask you about, of course, we'll talk about the concept of the strait in just a second, but the Secretary of Defense that we were just listening to his briefing in the last hour, he declared military victory, talking about the operation in the past tense. One of his first things he said was Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory of the battlefield, as if it is over. Congressman, do you think this is over?
No, I don't, but I would say that we've had significant victories, significant success. There's no Air Force, no Navy. The missile production's been destroyed. They still have some in their stockpiles. They have some nuclear processed fuel, but the ability to create more, I believe, has been destroyed. So I feel we feel very good about what we have done. We've set them back at least 5, 6, 7 years. Here's the concern. The government's still in place, and we should be negotiating from a position of strength, not a position that's good for them. But what worries me is if they remain in place and they hate us. I mean, I fought these guys. I've been targeted by them for 30 years while I was in the Air Force. They killed approximately 1,000 Americans. These people hate us. And when I say these people, the IRGC, the Ayatollahs, the mullahs, they will work with Russia and China as soon as they can to start rebuilding their military. And they will be a threat 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road. And so as long as this government's in place, total victory has not been earned. We've earned, I think, significant victories, but there is still a threat there that's not near term, not midterm, but a long-term threat that continues to exist at this time.
From Saudi Arabia to Bahrain to Kuwait, all have fended off fresh strikes from Iran just today. So when you're looking at a ceasefire now, if Iran keeps shooting and Iran's in control of the strait in some way, shape, or form, is there a deal here at all?
I am not sure there's a deal. That'll bear out the next 24, 48 hours. But if they keep firing, we still have more targets that we can hit in Iran. And we have, I wouldn't say air supremacy. Air supremacy is a technical term that we use in the Air Force. There is no threat of being shot down, but we do have air superiority. We have 90 to 95% free access anywhere in that country with a minor threat there to shoot us down. We saw that with the F-15. And we could continue to pummel targets. We can continue to target their leadership. In the end, we have the upper hand here. And it would be a mistake to withdraw that pressure prematurely if Iran continues to hit neighbors and act like a threat. They need to realize they were defeated on the battlefield. And when they get to that realization, they'll be more willing to negotiate with the United States.
Then what about this quote-unquote new weapon? Because the Strait of Hormuz. Jonathan Karl of ABC News, he spoke with the president this morning. And the way John is reporting it out is that the president suggested to him that Iran will maintain some control and that I guess he would accept that. The president told Jonathan Karl that he's interested in a joint venture with Iran to both be charging tolls of the shipping traffic going through. Would that be an acceptable outcome to you, Congressman?
I don't think so. I mean, the only acceptable outcome when you talk about joint tolls would be with a government that's friendly to the United States, friendly to its neighbors, a country that doesn't want nuclear weapons, a country that respects human rights for its own people. I don't think there's any joint ventures we can do with the current regime. Ronald Reagan tried it. Almost every president has tried it since 1979. And in the end, the leadership in Iran, not the people, they hate us. That we're the big Satan, and so we can't fool ourselves into thinking we have somebody here that we can negotiate with in good faith. We have decimated them, we've hurt them bad, but they still exist, the government, and they still have some capabilities. And if we stop the war right now, yes, we got near-term and mid-term successes here and peace, I would say, but they're long-term still a threat to America, Israel, and its neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, your skepticism here is warranted, obviously, especially with your experience. The battle may be on pause. The war, though, as you're pointing out, far from over, is how I hear you describe it. We know that J.D. Vance, Mark Caputo of Axios was just talking to Sarah about how J.D. Vance, the vice president, may be taking the lead in some of these talks now. He's in Hungary, and he's backing up and supporting Viktor Orban for re-election. You have been outspoken about the Hungarian prime minister before. What do you make of just the simple fact that J.D. Vance is in Hungary right now to boost Viktor Orban?
I'm attuned to this. My mom's side of the family were Hungarian ancestry. My grandpa, his family came from Hungary, and they have a long tradition. In 1956, they revolted against the Soviets. They're very freedom-loving, peace-loving people. But Prime Minister Orban is the most friendly country in Europe to Russia. They've done more to undermine Ukraine and NATO than any other country right now, other than maybe Russia itself, but the most NATO country that has tried to undermine NATO from within. I think it's a crazy, terrible mistake to go into someone else's country and campaign for one of the candidates over the other. We don't want people interfering in our elections. We've seen where people have tried that. We don't like it. I guarantee you the Hungarians don't like the United States going in there and messing with their elections. That's what Russia does. That's what China does. So I would encourage the administration to get the heck out of Hungary. Let the people there determine their own elections. And what happens if the other side wins? And they're going to say, oh, the president, the administration of America supported my opponent. How's that going to play out for years to come? I think it's a dumb mistake to get involved in other people's domestic and internal politics, particularly a democracy where people are going to vote. It sends a terrible message. I think the vice president should get out of Hungary ASAP, and I prefer them negotiating with Iran than doing what he's doing in Hungary.
Congressman, thank you so much for coming in. It's really good to have you here on the show.
Thank you.